สวัสดีทุกท่าน Everybody, thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here today. And I want to thank Professor Kunying Wongchai and Ajahn Anotai for all their amazing work for this conference. Today, I'm going to try to speak slowly because I usually speak too fast in English and in Thai and in Burmese and then end up stumbling or people say, what? Please say that again. ก็อาจารย์จะพูดช้าๆนะคะพยายามพูดภาษาอังกฤษช้าจะได้ฟังรู้เรื่องได้ไหมคะค่ะ So what I'd like to examine today for about 45 minutes and I need you all to tell me Ajahn Kit, time is up. Okay, because in the last 15 minutes of this hour I really want us to talk together about some of the issues and questions and ideas that Professor Peter brought up, and that you may be thinking yourself over the last hour and of course in all your work in your life. What I'd like to start with is the concept that an instrument, when it travels, wherever it travels in the world, the instrument sometimes is adapting the sound world of the new culture that it inhabits. So let's say we look at the kora from Ethiopia, Somalia, East Africa, and we watch that kora, a lyre, the idea of a lyre or a string instrument go through Egypt in the past, up into Persia, become the cembalum when it goes west, and become the kim in Thailand or the yangqin in China. If we think a little bit more organically about the sounds that instruments make and less about their identity as a cultural artifact, it seems to me that as musicians and as listeners, we can come up with such creative ideas about what sounds these instruments make, regardless of their origin. Something really interesting to me in my many years of living in Asia is the idea of the voice informing a musical style. So when you sing in Thai, you have to have tones. When you sing in Burmese, you have to have tones in Chinese for tonal languages. There's a whole language, artistic language, poetic language of the breath moving into a sound and stopping the sound. The breath moving on into a phrase according to how that language moves. So of course, that informs the instrument. We think about just talking right now. If I'm talking to you right now, I have some gaps, right? I stop. There's silence. I start. I get excited, right? Or I go very fast, or I go very slow. All of this phenomena we can see as music. If we hear that as music, and hear is the operative word, not see. But if we hear that, the next time you're in the market, just listen to what some people say, oh, I have so many voices I can't hear, or music in a hotel and the voices next door. If you start to hear the lines, the dynamics, the up and down, the texture, the inside, the outside, we can begin to think of those voices as a collection of phenomena, of sound events that musicians, composers make into music. Sometimes as performers, when we perform particular pieces, what Professor Peter was calling the subject and the object. So if I'm the subject and I'm playing, reading through a Beethoven sonata, there's such a distance. By exploring with your ears all kinds of sounds, you become closer to whatever you want to play, whatever it is, whatever style it is you want to play. What I'm going to suggest today, particularly to young musicians here at the Institute, is to explore the idea of making your own music and exploring sounds that maybe you will encounter in the music, in the compositions of your friends, of Thai composers, of composers from Europe, America, from all over the world, who ask you to do things at your instrument. So let's say a composer will have a direction in a score, and he asks that you make a particular sound on the inside of the piano. You follow the direction, and yes, you're doing it correctly, and you're reading the score, and you've done the right job, and it's all great. But if you only encounter that sound in that piece, then you have a little bit less connection with that sound world, and how to make that an exciting sound world, and how to make that a part of you. Like really, what we say in English, internalize. Really put it inside of you, inside your musical self, inside your imaginative self, and yourself as an artist, which combines all of these. So let me give you an example. If I thought maybe we could start with this idea of different instruments, not necessarily the piano, but at the piano, other instruments. So let's start with flutes, the sound of a bamboo flute, the sound of a suling in Indonesia, a klui in Thailand, palwe in Burma, or even if you go far afield, you know, a bamboo ney in Persia or Turkey. So if we were to do that, my space here that I want you to join me in, I invite you in, is a space where we're not going to say this is good or this is bad. It's a space where I'm not going to play you a piece necessarily. I'm not going to repeat for you a melody that is out in the universe, floating around. I'm going to go into a sound area where it's echoing a cultural phenomenon. So I think you'll get it pretty soon. So suppose we're at this instrument, Western piano, but I've just come from a performance of let's say in my case over the weekend, our Burmese musicians were just playing at the Anthropology Institute, and the flute player, the palwe player, and the ney player was following the lines of the singers. So let's just say that I will take the tonalities from him, in that case, and come to the piano and hear it again. Use a 3-octave range on the piano. But let's explore a little bit about how that would work. So let's say you have to make one tone at a time, right? So the fingers explore what the mouth would do. So the fingers explore the breath. To make that idea of the two notes of a trill or a tremolo. Let's say that we move into another tonality. We use another scale. So if right? So let's say we take a slendro or a pelog scale and we move that around. So it's not Indonesian music. It's the musician trying to go into a world that's a little different from the world that they know from classical music. So let's add the pedal a bit, right? So in languages that have melisma, that all of that would be traveling through sound in a way that would connect everything. When I went to Bali, whoops, is that on? No. When I went to Bali as a 19-year-old, the first place I went was to Ubud, and there was a flute player and a singer So there was actually someone copying what a dalang or a storyteller would do. And that's still in my ear. So the slide of that dalang's voice has been with me for so many years, right? I imitate it. It's not the real, it's not Balinese, right? But what I remember is the sound. Right? So that connection with that sound so many years ago, every time I hear that, I'm more able to enter into what a dalang would do at a shadow puppet play. Or do I know more about Balinese music? No, I'm ashamed to say I don't. But my musical self is more engaged. So another example would be, if we move on in instruments, so let's say, as a 7-year-old in Bangkok a long time ago, we would have can players come down from Mahasarakam and Isan in those days, and they would come to various events in Bangkok. So as a young child, the sound, while I was learning Bartok, small pieces playing from the children's book of Bartok, I was also hearing this. Musicians being the researchers, musicians being the people that question, the people that bring out new ideas, is so important. And that includes musicologists and ethnomusicologists. It doesn't divide. We don't divide necessarily by what field you're in. It's your curiosity, your ability to enter into another cultural sphere. So one of the things I talked about at a session at that other conference on folk performing arts in ASEAN was a phenomenon that I find frequently, particularly in our school in Myanmar, which is this hierarchy of thinking that Western music is better and traditional music is not so good, and that traditional music is not worth studying. So we all, I think, in our various ways, understand that situation, that problem. And many people confront it and work with it, and fortunately, I think in the 21st century, we're moving away from that division. So, for example, in playing this music with a can, when I come and meet a molam player or I hear a molam singer, again, like the experience in Bali, it's inside. It's not outside. It's not objective. It's becomes subjective. Thai music, in Dotri Thai, when I studied at Soundboard a long time ago, and one of the things I learned for a while was ranat, and how to hear ranat, and how to think in terms of a wrist that's very straight instead of a wrist at the piano that's very loose. So what happens when you bring a straight wrist to the piano? What happens when you bring octaves and tremolos and trills and patterns so that you can enter into patterns that are a little different from Western playing, right? So if I were to use two hands, like two mallets, space at the piano. It's reminding us, it's giving us another world to go into. What if I did that again and I moved the octaves apart? What if I did it like this? So our possibilities get very endless, but our source is from the Ranat, is from the technique of the Ranat. Another interesting thing is when you bring the idea of texture to the piano playing. So let's say I don't use the pedal, I'm using my hands an octave apart, and I just create what we call in English, and I guess in French, is a brocade. เป็นรูปภาพที่มีเนื้อหา And I'm thinking, how would that work? And I'm hearing, actually, all the time, more percussive sound. So if I wanted to make it a little more Renate, I would. On and on, sorry. But so the idea of music spreading without a break, without the breath, right? Is a different idea. It's a different cultural idea, musically. So it brings me, as the Western musician, into another way of hearing, another way of, another way of playing physically. What are my hands? What is the instrument? So somebody from the outside might say, oh, you're just playing piano. It doesn't, you're just copying, you're just imitating. But it's more than that, because what happens is when you play, your artistic self, your poetic self, your curious self is more, you're very engaged. So what is this about, this being engaged? Here's another example. In so many styles of drumming all over the world, but I'm thinking particularly in Southeast Asia, percussion is divided into a high pitch and a low pitch. They're constantly playing with each other. So we have wonderful two Burmese students here from the Cultural University in Myanmar. So let's say the low pitch and then the high pitch, right? Low pitch, high pitch. And if it's a drum, so for timing in Burmese music and the ching in Thai music, we have that alternating high and low. In drums, if we were to have a drumming sound, and you were really to explore it inside, right? Inside the piano, how could we make that sound? So there are a couple of possibilities. And it depends on the piano that you have. It depends on how the frame is barred, right? So some small pianos only have 3 bars, but a large 9-foot Steinway has actually 5. So let's find some pitches that we could use, right? And this is what I'd like to encourage you to do, is to explore without the score, right? Without the composers, you do it on your own, so that you start to get engaged in new sounds at the instrument. There's 1. There's 2. Sorry, that didn't count. There's 3. 4. Not so different. So, are they pitched? Are those sounds pitched? Yes, they have pitches. You can actually identify. Okay, so let's say there's a dance rhythm in, let's just arbitrarily, okay, dance rhythm in Burmese. Be dong ta, be dong ta, be dong ta, ta je, ta, be dong ta, be dong ta, right? So what would I do for that? I would try to find that. Can we find it? Right? Or if we had Thon Lamana from Thailand, let's say if we had and then I can also create my own work through improvisation to include the echo, การสะท้อนได้ยินไหมเนื้อหาของเสียงเกิดเยอะ There's so many materials, there's so many overtones, there's so many possibilities with that sound. So what if I put this down? Okay, I put this down and I want to find a space that will give me that up and down. Or no pedal. Right, so you can explore and keep moving. Or Balinese drumming. So I am doing this to encourage you all to try, or with your instrument. Let's say if you're a flutist, try overblowing. Try, if you're a violinist, try using your thumb on the G string, D string, A string, right? Slide your thumb up on the fingerboard instead of that, right? Or put your violin down like a South Indian violinist and play like this, right? Or you put your violin like a cello and then start to play sliding motions with your bow. In southern Burma, in Nuance state, there's something called the damdiol, the southern, it's a vertical violin played like a cello. Many possibilities. So I think that's sort of giving you enough of an idea. And to save time, what I'd like to go to right now is how this idea, right, of echoes, of different harmonic combinations would translate into somebody transcribing a composition that's from Balinese Gender that goes to pianos. And in this case, it's a piece for two pianos by a composer named Colin McPhee. And he's from Canada. And I had thought he died in 1970, but he died in 1960. So what we're going to ask is, Kun ask you, let Cindy, how can you? Okay, so we have some two wonderful students, Kun Cindy and Kun As, and they have learned the middle movement of a piece called Balinese ceremonial music, which are three different pieces transcribed for two pianos by Colin McPhee. So what we talked about last night, we worked together, they're doing fantastically, and what I encouraged them to do was to go to Bali in your mind, and go to a ceremony, right, where there's an offering, and there's going to be a shuttle puppet play, and there's an introduction to the shuttle puppet play. They're in a village, there's a lot of people talking around, there are people shooting beetles, and very crowded space. So what us and Cindy did was to look at and listen to Gender on YouTube of this piece. So they have the Gender sound in their mind. What would happen if they didn't have that sound? What would it be like? They'd be reading, right? They'd say, oh, okay, yeah, there's, oh, here he wants a forte, here he wants a piano. But they wouldn't be engaged with where that sound comes from, right? So I want you to think about some of these things. Pedal, using the pedal like a gong. So we talked about yesterday all the time, gong, open sound. There's a moment in this piece where you'll hear some staccati, and there's a Balinese instrument, a boss gong, series of boss gongs called chompong, and that gong is going to be stopped or open. So there's a stopped sound and an open sound. So the pianist is being asked to recreate that stopped and open sound. Octaves, very far apart octaves that cause a lot of overtones to come up and to echo the gamelan sound. So what's interesting about this piece, which was, I believe it was about 1932? Yeah, 1932 he wrote this. People were amazed, right? Other musicians were, how is this possible? You make the gamelan with the piano. So let's see what you think about all of this, and I'm going to invite
But it's so interesting. Yesterday in our session, the beginning of the session, you know, a little bit timid, but then both us and Cindy, they got more and more excited and more excited. And then when we got to where Carlo McPhee says, okay, fortissimo, and then piano, and then fortissimo, and then piano. It was so characteristic of what happens in gamelan, the immediate decay, immediate entry of sound. And they were able to do it. So I want to give them a big hand again. Thanks so much. And thank you to John Frank. I don't know where he is, but he coached them. There he is. Great, thank you. So we have a little bit of time left. I want to talk a bit, maybe a bit later. Maybe there's enough time to share with you this moment. So, Indonesian, a Javanese Pasindan came to Washington, D.C., and to New York, and we got together and we improvised a piece that we performed. So her name is Penirini Chandarini, and then she's from Solo. But what I'd like to do is share with you this piece. So it's an improvisation. She's improvising a poem about the moon in Javanese, which I don't understand, but we talked about the subject before we started. And then I worked with it as in certain ways. So let's see what comes out here. Share a little bit of that with you and encourage, again, even though we're thinking as if we're trained as Western musicians, we're always moving towards the next moment, towards the goal, towards harmony, towards making the melody come out in certain ways. In fact, this playing that I was doing was very Western. It had a lot of counterpoint in it. But what was helpful for me was to be able to use materials that were common to both Penny and my experience. So in that way, without going into someone's composition, but taking the responsibility as a performer to find sounds, to find techniques that will bring you closer to another music, to another sense of poetry, another sense of time, what the Indians called rasa, or in Burmese, ayada, aesthetic. That will help us, I think, all of us, so that in this era of focusing very narrowly with the internet on our own music or what we like or what we do, the more, because the resources are available to us now, the more we can go in with our own instrument and whatever strikes you as interesting and fascinating. I really encourage you to work things out on your instrument in ways that will make you understand time, duration, register, pitch collections, and then most importantly, intensity and emotion. Because that, if we can share as a world now that is sharing all this information, if we can somehow move beyond the information into meaning for us individually, how great that would be for all of us. So when I heard Burmese music for the first time in 1974 on a recording, I was quite amazed that the instrument had become another instrument, that the piano had become another experience. And in Burmese, the other experience is called sandhya. So a piano came into the royal court of the king around 1862, King Mindon, and the Burmese musicians played the piano as they would play drums, or the patla, the xylophone, or the harp. So again, in what I talked about earlier about the flute, using two hands, or with the ranat, you trying to play the piano with two fingers. You know, people make fun of, they call it typing at the piano, two-finger playing. Actually, two-finger playing is a very exciting phenomenon. And not just two fingers, sometimes three, sometimes one and two. So that collection of that fingering determined a whole style of music making at the piano. So instead of starts with this CNY, the timers. So all of the intervals that you hear are intervals that are central to Burmese music, and they're taught to beginners as names. So this idea of playing with just two and three fingers informs a whole way of playing the piano. So let me give you an example. There's an instrumental sort of display and that's a piece by, that was actually played by Gita Lungi Maukoko, a teacher that I worked with for a long time. So I'd like to sort of end with that and invite you to explore your instruments, and then maybe open up the floor right now to some of the ideas that we were talking about earlier. Can we do that? Just a little bit? ก็มีคำถามไหมคะ อาจารย์อนุทัยได้ไหม เดี๋ยวขอช่วยนะ Yeah, it doesn't have to be about this. It can be just this idea of, yeah, verb. Great.
It's okay to
great.
do that. Good morning. Vern de la Peña, University of the Philippines. Thank you very much for a wonderful, thought-provoking presentation. It ties up with the earlier presentation as well. The idea of objects like the piano being transformed, the new soundscapes. In fact, anthropologists call that the social life of things, that things are never permanently what they seem to you to be, but they're continually transformed. And you showed us very clearly, for example, in the piano in Burma. My question to you goes the other way. As performers or as artists, can we bring in our sound worlds to existing music? Let's say European classical music. Is that allowable? Is there space for that? Or is that off limits? Should Bach be Bach and Beethoven be Beethoven? Can they be played with the soundscapes of Manila or the soundscape of Jakarta being infused inside? Your thoughts, please.
I think it's a perfect question for this conference. It's absolutely, completely what the conference is about. What is the geographical domain of classical music? Is it informed by the neighborhood that surrounds it, the geography that it has? Let's see, it's a difficult question to answer. There is no answer. I mean, we have to keep asking about what I think is our relationship. What is our relationship to the sound itself? Like, do we isolate in concert halls, playing a Mozart concerto, and just having the sound of the piano with that Mozart concerto not reflect the Manila environs? In the player from Manila, there's a whole soundscape inside that's also a viewscape, you know, their life, our experience. And I'm always interested in that also. We lived in Beijing for 3 years, and so CCOM and Central Conservatory, they have different emphasis, one on classical music and the other on Chinese traditional music. And it's always interesting to see how composers from both conservatories, composers and students and faculty, have many ways of bringing that in. And I think there are some situations where I use the word hybrid loosely, but I use it positively. Where a composer will have a given piano style that you'll recognize as, completely Western, churny-based, but that the style has been transformed to, producing the sound of a lute. So in that sense, you have Czerny playing the pipa. You have the Czerny fingers playing the pipa song that's taking the pipa sound. So let's say I had no Czerny in me. Let's say I'm a pianist that I can't play Czerny, but I want to play pipa. So perhaps I can limit my scope to 5 tones in the middle of the piano or at the lower end or the upper end, but I play with those 5 tones. In other words, my creative response to, even as a beginner at the instrument, I own those sounds. Those sounds don't belong to someone else. They're mine. And I think the more we can share that as performers, as teachers, as that we can really own and determine where we go with sound. Anybody else?
Thank you very much for your most inspiring lecture, and thank you also for your question. I would like to relate to both. I think indeed your question, are we allowed, so to speak, is it possible to integrate, let's say, music from the Philippines to Western classical music? I think yes. And one of the examples that I could give is what Paulo de Assis, the pianist that was playing the Diabelli variations, he's showing us an example of that. He is actually, it would bring me too far now to explain the whole concept, but he's creating many renderings of these Diabelli variations, and that a certain one of these is very much related to some concepts of the philosopher Deleuze, and he calls these version, the Bali variations. And he brings in, and we saw part of it, he replaces some of the variations by new music, for example, or by integrating a string trio. Because, for example, Mozart relate to Beethoven relate to a certain moment to a trio. It's played on a piano. Paulo brings in the trio again. Now, the question is, why wouldn't he bring in a Philippine composer reflecting on Beethoven, as Beethoven reflected on his own variations or theme, and he would bring in some Philippine music into that it would be absolutely consistent to the philosophy of the researcher Paulo de Assis to integrate it. So that is a first reflection on your question. I would like to link up to you, Kit. What is very important for all of us, also in your lecture, is that we have to listen, the listening act. And I think every musician, be it a first-year student, so to speak, and a professional with long years of experience, the first thing we do is listen. We are our own judge. We play the piano, the first tones, and we check if we, as a musician, we are happy with what we create. And it's a constant dialogue, the listening act. So instead, I would encourage everyone, don't see the word research as something for later, or searching something for later. It's for now. We are searching constantly. We are adapting what we are doing by listening to what we are doing. Are we happy? We formulate constantly, all of us, we formulate the questions. Do I need a diminuendo here? Am I happy with what I'm playing? Is this the sound that I want to create? No, I'm not happy with it. How to do then? And then that how to do is brings us to a trajectory of hours, months, and years of work to finally understand that we are never happy with what we are doing, but we are improving, and that's what we call the development. So listening in your lecture was crucial, and I think that is maybe one of the links with what I try to convey.
Yeah, absolutely. And just shortly to continue from that, when we think about being blind and playing an instrument, and the notion since many myths, thousands of years of blind people playing music all over the world. The idea of the blindness, if you make yourself blind for a while, practice, think, play, it internalizes what, when your eyes are open, there's all this distraction sometimes. But sometimes when you practice without your eyes open, that hearing, that listening phenomenon, that capacity gets bigger and bigger, larger and deeper. So yeah, I would encourage that sometimes too. There are many sounds that I did not explore on the piano today. We didn't have time, but yeah, I would ask you guys to do it.
Thank you. I would just to commend you as well from the side of a composer, because for composers, people are often speaking about cultural purity and autonomy of a composition. And for example, I have been accused in Germany for not centuries, but 20 years, I'm not so old, just because of my biography, it's saying that I have lived in Bali for 5 years, and the people call me a neo-colonialist without listening to anything. And I said, you see, Balinese music has for me been something very close, and also something very far. Geographically, it has been very far. Aesthetically, it has been very close. The music of the medieval ages is historically very far from me, but it's maybe closer geographically. So for a composer, far and close is something very complicated. Finally, it all comes to your personal decision, what you want to do, what is your personality, what you express. And your personality is always the result of your lifetime experience whether this is the children's songs which you experience, whether it's the train when you're living beside the train station, it's classical music which we have played, it's Balinese music. I have come up with jazz. This is also part of mine. So if I would answer the question, what has brought me to an artistic decision, in a way I can't answer, because all these elements have then worked together, collaborate, and I have to find a solution which is my personality, that's all. So if Beethoven comes to the Philippines, that's fine for me. If the Philippines comes to Germany, that's also fine for me. It always depends on the artist, how he interacts with these influences.
Thank you. Yeah.
There's a response back there. Could I just add in something that I wasn't sure I agreed with, and that was when you said musicians coming from any different background all have this priority of asking questions. And I like that. That's completely right. But as someone who is now primarily a musicologist, I have a big problem with the questions musicologists now ask. Because I think many musicologists are trapped in the word trap, and they're trapped in the visual trap. And these are the two biggest areas that have been reinforced in the last 30 or 40 years. And the internet has helped us to get trapped very much in a more visual and, in a way, a somewhat less oral world. And I just wondered what you thought we should do with the many musicologists now who will not, in fact, be asking their questions from an oral base. You get trapped in either the semantics of something notational, and you have to say at the end of the day, but did it make any difference to what we heard? Or get trapped in something that starts to influence the composers, so they start to write music, which again I sometimes find aurally insignificant. How do we get that ear back? Because you mentioned the blind person having those special traps, and often I've wished I were blind. And here's the last question I've had, which I've never been able to answer through 30 years of teaching music. What do you look at when you listen to music? I was seriously asked that at the beginning of my career, and I still don't know the answer, because we kind of want to say that isn't the point. You're meant to be listening. How do you feel about where we go in education to reinforce the ear?
I have started using new words in English. So I no longer use the word viewpoint. I use the word hearing point or ear point. I no longer look forward to seeing you. I listen forward to seeing you, right? I don't have a gaze anymore. I have a hearing, because we don't have an oral equivalent. Our English in particular is so visual. The Thais, in Thai, there's a great word, paira, pra, and it's only for music, right? There's soy for things that you see, but there's pra for things that you hear. We don't have that. If we had that, I think we would be so much more receptive to the things that we hear. And it's so difficult, because it's beyond us. I mean, it's a bigger culture, right? But absolutely, if we could, I don't know, when I listen, I usually shut my eyes. I try not to look. But then that's not helpful, because you're trying to help someone with the way they're carrying themselves at the instrument, or maybe things aren't working, or would you shut your eyes at a play, at theater? So the choreography of music making, the body motions of music making, yes, we can hear the result, but if you're trying to help people, then, and if you feel like the accent isn't exciting enough, you have to refer to, something about the upbeat, or the way they hold the bow, or the way they come in to play a phrase on the piano. But that aside, I think, yes, we do have more listening, orality in the internet, but unfortunately, the screen just takes precedent. So, yeah, maybe we should just wear blindfolds so we can hear each other more. Yeah, sure, we can. If anyone's interested afterwards, I guess it's not up here. I just don't want to take your time. I have a piece that 6 pieces based on Burmese poetry that I translated and then made compositions using styles, Burmese piano styles. So if anyone's interested in that, I can open the laptop for you. I really want to encourage this gray area between playing the composition of somebody else, and you. You need, we as musicians need to take this move as performers to explore soundscapes, as Vern said. Thank you.
And thank you also for